Being a cheeky chap should never have been acceptable behaviour, and people did complain about it. Being a cheeky chappy and the guy that the public were attracted to as being the frank-speaking, playful man that they saw on the telly, he was not speaking on the television the way that he was speaking to the people around him. He wasn't putting his hand up, if you like, metaphorically, the skirts of the general public.
Greg Wallace has been sacked as a presenter of MasterChef by the company that makes it after an inquiry into alleged misconduct. It comes after women came forward accusing him of inappropriate behaviour, including his ghostwriter, who told this programme exclusively that he sexually harassed her. Shannon Kyle told me the presenter touched her inappropriately, made sickening sexualised suggestions to her, and answered the door wearing only his towel, which he later let go of.
I kind of looked up and then he dropped the towel. So I just, in front of me, and I had a notebook. So I just put it like this, and I just said, just go and get dressed. And then he did, he went off and got dressed. When we stood up to say goodbye, he went in for this hug. His face was just right next to mine, and we're about the same height, and I just completely froze. And then he just kind of said right into my ear, go on, just give me a little kiss, just give me just a little one. And I just paused, and then, he either let go or I kind of pushed him off a little bit, and then I just really quickly wanted to get away. I just said, look, I'm going now, and I was in tears. We did a short interview together in the hotel, and then after that, my brother, who lived in Birmingham at the time, came to pick me up. I saw my brother turn to say goodbye, and then as I was either walking towards the car and he followed me, or just before I started walking, I could feel him touching me around my backside, and my brother saw it. And so when I got in the car, he actually said, I just saw him, who lived in Birmingham at the time, came to pick me up. I saw my brother turn to say goodbye, and then as I was either walking towards the car and he followed me, or just before I started walking, I could feel him touching me around my backside, and my brother saw it. And so when I got in the car, he actually said, I just saw him do that. And actually, out of everything that happened, that was the thing that was most mortifying and humiliating, because it was my younger brother who saw it. And I was just so sort of in a fluster. I just said, look, just put your foot down, just get out of here.
Well, on his Instagram, Greg Wallace
do that. And actually, out of everything that happened, that was the thing that was most mortifying and humiliating, because it was my younger brother who saw it. And I was just so sort of in a fluster. I just said, look, just put your foot down, just get out of here.
Well, on his Instagram, Greg Wallace has said he has been, quote, cleared of the most serious and sensational accusations made against him. He said a report, which hasn't been published yet, found him primarily guilty of inappropriate language, and he apologised for some of his humour and language. BBC News, as you know, is this evening reporting fresh claims from dozens of other people, and Mr Wallace has described those as tittle-tattle. He also said he had been diagnosed with autism. Mr Wallace, if you are watching, you say that what has happened to you is an incredible injustice and a matter of public interest. We'd like to invite you to join us on Newsnight tomorrow to tell us about that. Let's speak now to Baroness Helena Kennedy, who is a Labour peer and chair of the Creative Industries Independent Standards Authority. Welcome to you. Thank you for being with us. As someone who is chair of this industry body, was Greg Wallace on your radar?
Well, we were certainly hearing from people their experiences of unacceptable behaviour, and particularly, it's true, largely verbal, but speaking in seriously inappropriate ways, often disgusting, and those were repeated often. But you've now heard that the BBC, since this has all come to light, have heard from many more people who felt that they just couldn't speak out at the time because they would have ended up losing their jobs if they had.
That's what they thought. I mean, a woman who worked with him on MasterChef, a junior member of the team, said that he pulled his trousers down in front of her. A woman who was a participant actually on the BBC Saturday Kitchen said he put his hand under the table and onto her groin. Another woman who says at an industry event in 2014 he put his hand up her dress. He has been sacked. Does that mean the tide is turning against this kind of behaviour, that it is being dealt with appropriately?
I do think that there is a serious shift taking place, and I don't say that lightly, Victoria, because I've been involved in doing cases of this kind and holding, chairing inquiries with regard to sexual misbehaviour over many years, and I'm always disappointed that we somehow don't make the progress that is promised at the given moment. And we know all the back cases of Jimmy Savile and Rolf Harrison, etc. But what's interesting about now is that you now have, for example, government is now, it's in the news I think just today, that they're going to actually themselves stop non-disclosure agreements being used to silence people who have made complaints and who are basically given a bit of money and told to go away and and get lost, and that's not going to be allowed anymore, because so
that is progress, you said.
I think that's real progress. It's happening legislatively, many different ways of preventing the cover-ups that have taken place. And I think that the promise, for example, that the BBC made after the report, the internal report that was conducted for the BBC, and the chairman and the director general both made a total commitment to actually get their house in order and to draw a line in the sand. And I think that we're seeing an example of it now. Right. And that has to happen across the industries. It has to happen at ITV and Channel 4 and all of but also in the streaming organisations, in the theatre, in the music industry. Our creative industries are a great part of what Britain does so well in the world. But we have to get this right, and the way in which people are employed really matters.
Greg Wallace was sacked by the production company rather than the BBC. But what he says he says in his Instagram statement, I was hired by the BBC and MasterChef as the cheeky greengrocer. For over 2 decades, That authenticity was part of the brand. Now, in a sanitised world, that same personality is seen as a problem. Is he being judged for behaviour, going back 20-odd years, by the standards of 2025?
The thing about this is that it should never have been acceptable behaviour, and people did complain about it. Being a cheeky chappy and the guy that that the public were attracted to as being the frank-speaking, playful man that they saw on the telly, he was not speaking on the television the way that he was speaking to the people around him. He wasn't putting his hand up, if you like, metaphorically, the skirts of the general public, and so they weren't seeing this cheeky chappy on his uglier side. Now, I know that Greg Wallace is saying that he is someone with neurodiversity problems, that he's autistic, and that may explain some of his deeply inappropriate behaviour, that he's not inhibited, that he's disinhibited in what he does. But that's also a role for management, that if you employ someone and you discover that they actually don't know how to contain themselves and how to behave, then you have to basically be taking them on one side and nipping it in the bud at an early stage. That was not done.
Yes.
And I think that's part of a reflection of the way in which television has changed in the last 20 years. And it's not so much that, suddenly, we become politically correct and we're not letting people put their hands up people's skirts and touch them and grope them in gross ways or exposing themselves and so forth. I mean, when was that ever acceptable? And so the question is, what has gone, what's happening here? One of the difficulties is the line, if you like, the sort of the line of management, the control thing. And it's partly because the television companies no longer make their own product anything like as much as they did. They outsource it and they commission work by smaller production companies that don't have human resource departments and so on. And so there are no places to which people can take their complaints, which is why CISA was established, was to say,
which is your organisation.
This changed world means that there has to be a place to which people can go and say, look, we've got a problem. The star of the show is misbehaving. How do we handle that? And you can give good guidance and nip it in the bud at an early stage. And that's what one wants to see. I feel that if I was going to be giving advice to this good man, this cheeky chappy, I'd be saying to him, look, take this as a lesson. There may be an opportunity for you to make some comeback at some, but don't say that all these women have made this stuff up, and don't say that it's all invented, because you don't get 50 women stepping forward. And they're mainly freelancers, Victoria, because they know that there'll be no job for them if they're young and new to the professions and they're working as runners, or they're working as assistant producers, or they're working in lesser roles than him. They can easily be preyed upon, but their complaints won't be listened to. That has to stop.
And again, just to say that the report actually into the accusations against him hasn't been published yet. He says he has been cleared of the most serious and sensational accusations made against him. He says the report found him primarily guilty of inappropriate language, and he has apologised for some of his humour and for some of his language.
BBC has basically been banned from ever working there again after the call. Let's talk now, though, to Rebecca Wright, campaign director for Defund the BBC, because it turns out that Greg Wallace, despite the fact that he says he's now going to war with the BBC, has basically been banned from ever working there again after the corporation ruled he was not safe to have in the workplace. Another one. I mean, there's so many of these characters. Rebecca, very good morning to you.
Morning, mate. Sounds
like a pretty dangerous place to work, doesn't it, old BBC? You never know when some guy's going to come running out of a dressing room at you with no clothes on and a sock carefully placed over his member.
I mean, this is the thing. It's really confusing about this story. Is he a cheeky greengrocer, or is he this rampant sex pest? And if he's a rampant sex pest, why has he been allowed to stay at the, working for the BBC for 17 plus years? They're coming out with a sort of high and mighty attitude where, he's got this learned behaviour, which then can't be unlearned, which doesn't make any sense to me. But, if that's the case, that he's done all of these awful things, and we'll see, when their sort of investigation comes out one way or the other, why have they allowed him to carry on? Because these have been made early on in his career with them.
Right, because Claire Powell, who's head of compliance apparently, says that they wrote to him in 2019, basically, to say that his behaviour was not conducive to a good working atmosphere and his conduct was not acceptable. And yet he carried on. It says the BBC will not tolerate behaviour to occur on any production that is inappropriate, unprofessional, and or has the effect on individuals to feel sexually harassed. But, that was 5-6 years ago.
Absolutely, and the most severe allegation that's been reported on is this member of staff who he apparently pulled his trousers down in front of, and as we know, he doesn't wear any underwear, so she got an eyeful. But that was back in the early 2010s. So she worked there between 2011 and 2013.
Right. That seems to be a very long time ago, and I mean, you can have, not much sympathy with him, but some sympathy, given that he did that and he wasn't fired.
Exactly, and so he thought it was okay to carry on. So maybe it's that the BBC has changed their policy now, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? Is that he's been there all of this time. He's been doing this behaviour. He thinks that he was a cheeky chappy greengrocer, and that's part of his persona and what he was hired for. And obviously, as you say, he was allowed to carry on. And now suddenly the BBC is taking this moral high ground. Well, they should have, if he was doing those awful things, then they should have been cutting that out straight away.
Well, exactly right. I mean, certainly there seems to be an outside production company involved as well, doesn't there? Where they were also told by several women that he was a nuisance and that he had pestered them and that he sexually harassed them and all that, and they all kind of dismissed it and just went, well, he is who he is, don't worry about it, calm down.
Yeah, exactly. And they said to the woman who he pulled his trousers down, allegedly pulled his trousers down in front of that, you're not being Jimmy Savile, you're not under 16, And so the BBC really needs to look at these sort of outside production companies that they're using if they want to take this moral high ground. And if we're being forced to pay for the BBC and they're going to have this position, and which they should do if these allegations are correct, then they need to be managing these outside production companies effectively.
Yeah, well, they really do, because I know it's not BBC related, it's ITV related, but on the front page of the Sun today we've got Gino De Campo set to start a new life down under in Australia, because he's more or less been told, there's not going to be much for you here. Job offers are going to be few and far between. Because one of the things I remember that sort of showed up the hypocrisy of ITV was that I think there was an episode of This Morning, at least one, where Gino De Campo was cooking naked. And you could clearly see his backside in a still. That's the hypocrisy of ITV was that I think there was an episode of This Morning, at least one, where Gino De Campo was cooking naked. And you could clearly see his backside in a still. That's the hypocrisy of ITV was that I think there was an episode of This Morning, at least one, where Gino De Campo was cooking naked. And you could clearly see his backside